Netanyahu just broke the ceasefire, and for a few hours on June 2, 2026, the entire architecture of U.S.-Iran diplomacy that Trump has been carefully constructing since April came within one bad phone call of complete collapse. Israel's offensive against Hezbollah in Lebanon on Monday threatened to upend U.S. efforts toward a preliminary peace agreement with Iran, in a fast-paced series of developments that saw Iranian state media announce Tehran was suspending negotiations with the U.S., while Israel threatened new strikes on the southern suburbs of Beirut. Let that sink in. Not a theoretical risk, not a diplomatic warning letter, an actual suspension. Iran walked away from the table, and the thing that pulled them back wasn't a policy concession or a new security guarantee. It was Trump, personally, picking up the phone and confronting Netanyahu in what sources are describing as a heated exchange.
This is Professor David. Subscribe if you haven't, and stay close because this one moves fast. Trump's announcement of a fresh ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah came after Tehran reportedly threatened to bolt talks with the U.S. if the IDF didn't cease its strikes in Lebanon. And then following his announcement, Trump declared that talks were continuing at a rapid pace with the Islamic Republic of Iran. He described what happened as a little glitch. That is quite possibly the most understated description of a geopolitical near miss since someone called the Cuban Missile Crisis a misunderstanding. Here is what you actually need to understand about what happened on June 1st and 2nd. This wasn't just about Lebanon. It was about the Strait of Hormuz. It was about oil prices. It was about whether the American economy enters the back half of 2026 with a fragile but functioning energy order, or whether it tips into a supply shock that the Federal Reserve has zero tools to fix. Because that's the leverage point underneath all of this. The moment Lebanon escalates beyond what Iran will tolerate, Tehran has one card it can play that causes pain everywhere simultaneously. Iran has suspended all indirect talks with the U.S. and announced it would pursue complete closure of Strait of Hormuz, accusing Israel of continuing crimes in Lebanon, and stating that any ceasefire breach on one front breaks the truce in general. Complete closure. Those two words should stop you cold. The Strait of Hormuz is the route through which more than 20% of global oil supplies usually flow, 1/5 of the world's energy. And right now, it is not fully open. It is constrained. Commercial traffic through Hormuz remains constrained, with geopolitical tension extending to Lebanon, keeping investors focused on the risk of prolonged supply disruptions in a region that normally handles around 1/5 of global oil and LNG trade. So when Trump calls what happened on Monday a glitch, what he's really saying is Netanyahu nearly handed Iran the justification it needed to shut down the world's most important oil corridor, permanently, and present it as a defensive response to Israeli aggression. That's not a glitch. That's a 5-alarm fire that got put out before most people saw the smoke. Now let's get into the mechanics of what actually happened, because the sequence matters. Iranian state media outlet Tasnim news agency reported that Iran's negotiating team would halt all diplomatic communications with U.S. negotiators until Israel ceases operations in Lebanon and Gaza. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi added that the existing ceasefire between the U.S. and Iran is unequivocally a ceasefire on all fronts, including in Lebanon. That's the key phrase, all fronts. Iran has been insisting since the April 16th ceasefire that Lebanon is covered by it. Israel has been insisting, loudly, repeatedly, publicly, that Lebanon is not. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu stated that the ceasefire agreement announced by President Donald Trump between the U.S. and Iran did not apply to Lebanon, meaning Israel would continue striking Iran-backed Hezbollah terrorists there. So you have two parties to adjacent conflicts, each claiming a completely opposite interpretation of what was agreed. And in the middle, you have Trump, trying to hold it all together, trying to get a deal done, trying to get the strait open, trying to bring energy prices down before American households feel this at the pump all summer. And Netanyahu keeps pulling the thread. Think about the position this creates for Trump. He's not just a diplomat here. He's a deal-maker with economic skin in the game. Trump told ABC News he believes an agreement to reopen the Strait of Hormuz and extend the ceasefire with Iran is reachable over the next week, but said, "I still have to get a few more points in order to sign off." That's a man who knows he's close,
And close is the most dangerous place to be when your ally keeps making unilateral moves that could blow up your negotiating position. Trump said he personally asked Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to withdraw forces from Beirut and avoid further escalation in the Lebanese capital, and also claimed he had spoken with Hezbollah representatives through intermediaries. He spoke to Hezbollah. Let that land for a second. The President of the United States, who has designated Hezbollah a terrorist organization, ran indirect communications with them to preserve a ceasefire his own ally was threatening to destroy. After Trump announced he spoke with Hezbollah leadership, the Iran-backed group agreed to a U.S. proposal calling for a ceasefire with Israel, according to a statement from the Lebanese embassy in Washington. But after Trump's announcement, Netanyahu said the Israeli military would keep striking southern Lebanon as planned, and Defense Minister Israel Katz denied there was a ceasefire in Lebanon at all. So within hours, you had Trump declaring victory on the ceasefire, Hezbollah confirming it, and Netanyahu's own defense minister publicly contradicting the President of the United States. That is not a coalition. That is a managed fracture that keeps threatening to split wide open. And here is where the financial analysis matters, because markets priced in some of this but not all of it. WTI crude futures climbed above $98 per barrel, as Israeli strikes on Lebanon and the ongoing closure of the Strait of Hormuz strained diplomatic efforts. Though prices were still on track to drop more than 10% for the week after the U.S. and Iran agreed to the initial ceasefire. 10% in a week. That's how much energy risk premium the market stripped out when the April ceasefire was announced. And it's also exactly how much could come roaring back if this unravels. The people watching this most closely right now are not cable news anchors. They're tanker operators, ship owners who have been waiting for clearer guidance on Hormuz access before routing their vessels through. The crucial waterway remains largely closed as ship owners wait for clearer guidance on access. They are not moving. They are parked, watching this, doing the math on whether a deal gets signed in the next week or whether the next Netanyahu strike on Beirut sends the whole thing back to the beginning. And the Hormuz situation is not the only maritime pressure point here. Iran has warned that another major maritime choke point, the Bab al-Mandeb Strait, could come under pressure if regional tensions continue to rise. The Bab al-Mandeb, that's the Red Sea entrance. That's the route for everything heading from Asia to Europe without going around Africa. The Houthis already disrupted it through 2024 and into 2025. If Iran decides to activate both choke points simultaneously, Hormuz and Bab al-Mandeb, you are not looking at an oil supply squeeze. You are looking at a global shipping crisis that would make the post-COVID supply chain disruption look like a minor inconvenience. This is the leverage architecture that most analysis misses. It's not about Iran's nuclear program. It's not about Hezbollah's rockets. It's about geography. Iran sits at the narrowest point of the world's most important body of water, and they know it. And every time negotiations stall, or Israel does something that embarrasses Tehran publicly, the strait becomes a bargaining chip. Trump has raised concerns about Iran not adhering to agreed terms regarding the flow of oil through the Strait of Hormuz, saying Iran was doing a very poor job in allowing oil shipments, and warning against reports of Tehran charging fees on tankers passing through the crucial waterway. Charging fees. On other countries' oil tankers. In international waters. That's not a ceasefire. That's a toll booth in the middle of a sea lane that belongs to the world. And Iran has been testing exactly how much of that the Trump administration will absorb before the pressure tips back toward military posture. Now let me give you the deeper tension here because it's the one that almost nobody is naming directly. Trump and Netanyahu are not on the same strategic page. They haven't been since early April. And the gap is widening. Trump's phone call with Netanyahu became heated as he pressed Israel to scale back its Lebanon offensive. This is not two allies disagreeing about tactics. This is a fundamental split in strategic vision. Trump's theory of the case is get a deal with Iran, reopen Hormuz, declare a win, bring energy prices down, strengthen the dollar, shore up the American economy ahead of the 2026 midterms. Netanyahu's theory of the case is eliminate Hezbollah's military capacity while Iran is weakened, reshape the security architecture of the northern border, and worry about diplomatic consequences later. Those two visions are not compatible on the current timeline. You cannot simultaneously negotiate a diplomatic resolution with Iran while your ally is escalating a military campaign against Iran's most important regional proxy. Every bomb dropped in southern Lebanon is a message to Tehran that says, the ceasefire isn't real, the deal won't hold, don't trust Washington to deliver. And Iran is listening. Iranian Parliament Speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf told Lebanese Parliament Speaker Nabi Berri that Iran might retaliate if Israeli attacks in Lebanon continue. Retaliate. That is the word. Coming from Iran's lead negotiator. While talks are nominally back on, the dual track, fighting and talking, has a hard limit, and Iran just signaled where it is. U.S. Central Command said Monday that American forces intercepted 2 Iranian ballistic missiles targeting bases in Kuwait, further testing an already fragile ceasefire. U.S. service members are still in the crosshairs. The war between the U.S. and Iran is technically paused, not ended. And those missiles headed for Kuwait are a reminder that the ceasefire is a suspension of hostilities, not a resolution of them. One miscalculation, one strike that kills Americans, one Hezbollah rocket that lands in the wrong place in northern Israel, and the pause ends. Since March 2, Israel has killed more than 3,400 people in Lebanon, while seizing large swaths of the country and displacing about 1/5 of the population. 1/5 of Lebanon's population displaced. That is not a limited counterterrorism operation. That is a country being dismantled. And the longer it continues, the harder it becomes for any Iranian leadership, hardline or pragmatic, to be seen negotiating with the United States while their principal regional partner is being destroyed on live television. There is also something important to understand about internal Iranian politics here. The IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, and the formal diplomatic apparatus in Tehran are not the same thing. The negotiators can say talks are back on. The IRGC can fire missiles at U.S. bases in Kuwait. Both things can be true at the same time. And when you are trying to assess whether a deal is real or performative, you have to watch the IRGC's actions, not the foreign ministry's statements. Iran's announcement came just days after Trump brought on tougher terms for the deal between the two sides, which likely sparked Tehran's decision on Monday, according to the Washington-based Institute for the Study of War think tank. Trump pushed harder on the terms. Tehran pushed back by suspending talks. And then Netanyahu pushed Lebanon. And then Iran threatened Hormuz closure. That is not a negotiation. That is a pressure cascade, and every link in that chain is interdependent. Here is what the next 7 days actually mean. Trump said a deal on Hormuz and the ceasefire extension could be done over the next week. A regional source told CNN the negotiations were back on track just hours after Iran suspended them over Israel's offensive in Lebanon. So the diplomacy is resilient. It keeps restarting. But it keeps getting interrupted by the same actor for the same reason. The question nobody in Washington is answering cleanly is this: does the United States have the ability, or the willingness, to actually constrain Netanyahu? Because so far the answer appears to be no. A heated phone call is not a constraint. A ceasefire announcement that Israel's defense minister immediately contradicts is not a constraint. And if the U.S. cannot deliver Israeli restraint to the Iranians, then every diplomatic progress Trump claims is built on sand. And the markets understand this even if they're not pricing it fully. Oil is trading in a band, not collapsing, not spiking. Because traders are doing exactly what you should be doing right now, assigning probability weights to 2 scenarios. Scenario 1. Trump gets his deal in the next week, Hormuz reopens, the ceasefire holds, Netanyahu is quietly walked back from Beirut, and energy markets exhale. Scenario 2. Another Israeli strike tips Iran back into suspension mode. The deal collapses, the strait stays closed, and oil goes back above $100 a barrel, heading into the American summer driving season. Both are live, neither is dominant, and the thing that determines which one happens is not a peace negotiation. It's a phone call between Washington and Jerusalem that either holds the line or doesn't. Trump told CNBC he wasn't bothered by the potential collapse of negotiations with Iran, saying, "I don't care if they're over, honestly," and then within hours declared talks were continuing at a rapid pace. That is not mixed messaging. That is a negotiator showing Iran he has no emotional investment in the outcome, while simultaneously working every back channel to keep the outcome he wants within reach. It's a specific technique. Whether it's working is another question. The real wild card is what happens inside Lebanon if the ceasefire genuinely holds for the next few weeks. Netanyahu authorized direct negotiations with Lebanon aimed at disarming Iranian-backed Hezbollah militants and establishing relations between the two neighbors, with talks expected to begin at the State Department in Washington. Israel and Lebanon, technically at war since 1948, sitting down at the State Department. That would be a genuine historical moment. But only if Netanyahu can simultaneously restrain his own military operations long enough for those talks to have any meaning. Right now, the gap between Netanyahu's words and his military's actions is the central instability in the entire regional picture. He says ceasefire, the IDF strikes. He says negotiations, the fighter jets don't stop. Despite Trump's ceasefire push, Netanyahu's office said Israeli forces would continue operations in southern Lebanon. Israel has maintained that military action will persist if Hezbollah continues firing at Israeli cities and civilians. That's a conditional that Hezbollah will never fully satisfy, which means it's functionally not a condition at all. It's permission to keep fighting with a diplomatic alibi attached. And here is the thing that should concern every American watching this from an economic perspective. The Federal Reserve right now has limited room to respond to a supply-side oil shock. Interest rates have been held at restrictive levels to fight inflation. If oil spikes back to $110, $120 because Hormuz closes again, the Fed faces an impossible choice: raise rates further into a slowing economy to prevent second-round inflation, or hold rates and watch inflation re-accelerate through energy prices. Neither option is clean. Neither option is painless for ordinary Americans. The Trump administration has released about 58 million barrels of oil from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve to cushion the impact of Hormuz disruption. 58 million barrels is roughly 2 to 3 days of global consumption. It's a shock absorber, not a solution. And if this goes on for months, that cushion is gone. The families in the middle of the country filling up their trucks, paying heating bills, watching grocery prices that are still elevated after 3 years of post-pandemic inflation, they are the constituency that absorbs the consequences of everything happening between Washington and Jerusalem and Tehran right now. They don't know about the ceasefire talks. They don't know about the IRGC's missile intercepts over Kuwait. They just know what the number on the gas pump says. So when you strip away the diplomatic language, this is what the situation actually is on June 3, 2026. A fragile U.S.-Iran ceasefire is being actively undermined by an Israeli military campaign that the United States cannot or will not stop. Iran is using the threat of Hormuz closure as its most powerful lever. Trump is trying to close a deal in the next week while managing a public break with his closest regional ally. Oil markets are in a holding pattern that could break either direction, and the person whose next move matters most is the one who has been least predictable throughout all of this. The question worth sitting with is not whether the ceasefire survives the next news cycle. It's whether Washington has genuinely accepted that managing Netanyahu is now a precondition for managing Iran. And if so, what that acceptance actually looks like in practice, rather than in heated phone calls. This is Professor David. I'll see you in the next one.